Hello, I'm Krista McAllister, and welcome to Serious Leadership. Whether you're growing your business, growing your career, or possibly both, thank you for listening. I am thrilled to have two incredible thought leaders joining our discussion today. Katie Burke, a family law attorney, workplace investigator, and family office mediator. I thank you so much for being here, Katie.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And Kristina Hill, interim HR leader for growing businesses with a particular expertise in family offices.
Nice
I'm
to
so
be here
glad.
today.
It's wonderful because I always learn so much from the two of you, and I appreciate your unique perspectives on how we can transform the way we navigate very kind of chaotic situations and really become the catalyst for a more harmonious, engaging work environment. You each are brought into situations that can often be emotionally charged, and you are the ones to be the calming voice to help everyone involved really find that path forward. And we've all seen these situations. I mean, you've got this blend of circumstances and personalities that can quickly turn things very uncomfortable at work. It's like this tornado effect that tends to cause a lot of issues, sometimes chaos, and it really ends up causing everyone a lot of stress. From the different situations that each of you are pulled into, what are some common ones that you see lead to that tornado effect and they almost get spun out of control? Katie, why don't we lead off with you?
Sure. So I can think of three, and they all three have to do with limited resources. So the first one is the limited resource of budget in the workplace. When people in different departments or various members on a team, whoever needs to split whatever money is available for whatever project they're working on, that can cause friction because everybody, thinks their idea is the most important and what they're working on is the most important to them. The second is the limited resource of somebody's attention and praise, whoever it is that people find meaning from, that can cause all kinds of things that I'll talk about later that remind me and remind people who are thinking in these terms of family systems of families competing for parents' attention. And then the third would be the limited resource of time. So just when things get really rushed and people can't be on their best behavior that how they would like to be because everybody's stressed, and that's when the blame game can happen. And if this had happened sooner, then I would have gotten this or something like that.
We can picture these because we've all been in these situations. I know, Christine, I can only imagine some of those situations that you get called into. What do you see leading up to that?
I see a lot of individuals wanting to do the best that they can, but are operating from a place of fear or not understanding. So there's a misalignment, and they're trying to hold on to whatever their understanding is or what they can control within the situation. And so sometimes you get a loss of everyone wanting to come to the table with an open mindset and willingness to kind of get to the next step. And when we're trying to evolve an organization and lead it through its change, most of the time we are having to kind of manage the behavioral components and the readiness for the change. And the prep work that comes with that is being transparent and setting the ground rules for how we are going to engage together and what are our kind of the purpose and objectives of working together. And when everyone is aligned on the understanding and the roadmap that we're going to follow to get there, then it allows for more meaningful work to get done because it's clear and everyone has a stake in the game and understands what that stake is.
I mean, most of us leaders of organizations, we don't necessarily lead through change on a day-to-day basis. So it's tough to think through some of those things that you just mentioned, recommendations for kind of being proactive. How do we communicate? How do we take away that fear? And you're generally getting called in and helping out, helping to set that up, or when some of us don't get it right, unwind that. What are some of the strategies to stay calm and composed when we don't get it right and those stressful situations occur?
Well, I've found that for myself, what I need to do to stay steady and calm is to rely on my own expertise and my frameworks that I put in place in order for me to be successful. So when we start to veer off our journey, I tend to go back to the set of purpose, objectives, and key results that we laid out at the beginning of the project or change management process, and try to get everyone else to refocus. Or if we're in the middle of a conflict and trying to resolve a conflicting opinion on a strategic objective, one of the things that has always worked for me is to kind of feel the temperature of the room and really try to find the right times where we can take a break, step away, and then come back to the table when we're kind of fresh and have had maybe a 10 to 15 minute kind of pause. Because sometimes these conversations can get quite heated, and there's a lot of personal emotion that can be brought into the conversation, because if we're making a change and it's a change that a COO was leading initially, and we're pivoting the kind of ownership of leading that change to someone else in the organization, there can sometimes be a feeling of, not meeting the objective, or, losing that control, or, it was my baby. I raised it to this level. Like, I should be able to continue on leading it, but sometimes there needs to be that change of perspective. So for myself, trying to keep people aligned with the purpose and try to give that psychological safety during the change management process so that everyone feels heard and validated, but also trying to manage the emotional components of it, and finding those breaks in the conversation to allow people to refocus.
You just mentioned psychological safety, and I really want to come back to that. So I just made a note because I think that's such an important component of this. And you mentioned that control. We can't always control the circumstances around us, but we can control our reactions to it. Katie, you're in some very interesting discussions, both with your family law practice as well as workplace investigations and mediations. What are your recommendations, or even some of your tools for managing emotions and kind of keeping composure in a meeting? Because once you lose it, that is a really tough one to gain back that respect, or gain back what we may have lost when we said things we shouldn't. How do you manage through that and to keep really control that the way that we react to it?
Yes. I'll use an example from my family law practice. So I draft a lot of premarital agreements, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because that's one example of many I could come up with about times when I get things really in order. I like to plan ahead. I'm a clear communicator, and everybody else is just messing up my world. And in the premarital agreement environment, what that looks like a lot of times is I'll draft the agreement and I'll get everything done on whatever timeline I say we need to do it in. And whoever's drafting is really leading the whole process. And then sometimes I get a really good reviewing attorney and everything goes really smoothly. But the vast majority of cases, I'll get somebody who waits till the last minute, either intentionally as a strategy to throw something in when there's not enough time to negotiate, so they think, or they do it because there's inertia. They just don't want to review something that they didn't draft, and they have to, come up with something to say back. I used to get really annoyed at whoever that individual attorney was on the other side who would do that kind of thing. And then I recently started thinking about it and thinking, that most of the time, this is actually exactly what's going to happen. So rather than looking at that person as such a problem and then getting in that kind of stomping, whether they ever see it or not, because there is the thing you talked about losing it, and that's just really bad, but also just your own kind of composure and realizing you're still in control of everything, and it's okay. Everyone has the goal to get this done by the same time, and it's just a question of how we do it. So I've started really just reminding myself of that, and it's really pattern matching. It's like, oh yeah, this is just like that other one where so-and-so did this. And I don't have to feel badly about this other person. I don't have to feel like, poor me, now I'm working later tonight than I thought I would. It's like now when I take on a premarital agreement or whatever any other kind of example is, I can pretty much expect this is going to be the cadence. And then if it doesn't happen that way and everything's smoother than I expect, then that's great. But if it falls apart in the end, or there's a little chaos created in the end that could have been avoided, I've really come to see that's, I think, human nature for the most part. And you're rarely working with an entire team of people who all think ahead and do things in a really organized way. So that's my example. And when I think that way, I just am calm. I'm like, this is fine. I've done this 10 million times before. I can skip the huffing and puffing step. And now I can just realize, we have leverage. We all have the same amount of time to get this thing done. And it's not a catastrophe.
And I think too, like as advisors and integrated individuals into organizations, one of the biggest takeaways that I've realized to be successful is to raise your hand when you start to see things pivoting from what you expected, and to raise when you're starting to embark on an obstacle or challenge, or you may see one in the horizon based on the decisions that's being made right now. And oftentimes there's oh, I don't want to disrupt the process, or, I don't want to, if we raise our hand and say, this isn't going to work now, this is going to, derail the last 6 months of work that we just put into this process. So maybe we're just going to let it slide and let it go underneath, push it under the rug, but it always comes back around. And no matter how hard you try to avoid any of the challenges or obstacles that are faced, it's, sometimes unavoidable, but it's even more unavoidable if you raise your hand and you say, okay, we're starting to, meet some conflict here, and let's stop, pause, and address it, and then we can move forward.
I think that you came up with something of, sometimes it's not what you're doing, but how you're doing it, the language that you're using. How, as a business leader, how are you being that steady presence, that calm voice, and being able to find the right words so that you're not causing disrupt, because will come off as disruption. Wait a minute, stop what we're doing. What are some recommendations on how to come about that in a productive way versus coming across as, Kristen's stopping the train again, let's all get off? What are some recommendations for coming across in a productive way that, you're not just wreaking havoc?
Great question. I think the most important thing is to know your client and know the subcultures of that client, whether it's that they might be have resistance to myself bringing up a problem because maybe they don't necessarily see it. We'll see it as one. They've never gone through a process like this before. And so there needs to be a bit of education and some presetting of expectations. And then also I think it's understanding their motivators, and everyone has a different motivation for wanting to get on board with change. And so you change your language based on the audience that you're trying to persuade or like lead through the building of consensus. And I think it depends on what level of the group that you're meeting with. So if you're meeting with the C-suite, you might address the possible obstacle or challenge in the way that it speaks to financial success or financial impact. If we move forward without discussing or resolving the obstacle, that might lead to a talent issue where we might not be able to attract or retain talent. And if the organization has growth goals that they're trying to achieve, and not being able to attract or retain the talent is going to be detrimental to achieving our success, then I need to kind of structure the way that I'm bringing up the information in the context or through the lens of, well, we're not going to be able to achieve these things on this side of the business, like retaining talent or attracting talent, if we don't, address it now, for these different things.